All right. So we are now at the third part of this flipped classroom, and we are going to very quickly go over the main players because these individuals are not quite so important, or at least like you don't need to know all of them for right now. But you do need to know about Dom Henrique, who established a Portuguese school of navigation. The Portuguese were kind of the first out of the gates here. They were the fastest to get onto the exploration game. But eventually they were surpassed by other groups. The first explorer that's key here is Diaz. Diaz was the first person to round the Cape of Good Hope, which is the tip of South Africa. And this was a really scary thing because the Cape of Good Hope, it's like you really hoped you were going to survive after that, because the winds at the Cape of Good Hope could, crash your ship into land really easily. And the Europeans didn't know what was coming on the other side of Africa. They did not know, and they were scared about it. But so that's Bartholomew Diaz. Vasco da Gama was the first one to reach India, and he made a 4,000% profit when he brought back goods like cotton fabric, which was quickly called calico, from India. He landed in Calicut. So Europeans were like, "Whoa, we want that kind of money, right?" Then Spain gets into the game under Ferdinand and Isabella. They send out Columbus, who is trying to reach India, thinks he lands in Japan, tells the Spanish that he is getting tons and tons of gold when he's really not. But anywho, he lands in the Americas and you know discovers or whatever the new world. All runs into the new world, runs into this tiny island, and yeah, that's Columbus. Columbus. This is, we can't discount, like, we as much as he's kind of this misanthrope in history, like, or he used to be this hero, and that's kind of changed around. There were so many guys out there. This Columbus kind of he's just the guy who originally finds the Americas. Magellan, well, actually, his crew circumnavigates the globe. He is killed around the Philippines in a skirmish with some indigenous people. But his crew, some of them, do make it back to Europe, although they have to subsist on eating their shoes and rats on the ship, and only like 5 people make it back. Don't quote me on that number, but it is a very small, small, small number, and they kind of trickle back into Europe. They have to take other ships to get back into Europe. They don't even have any ships left. Yes, it's successful and a good memory for the Europeans. The Russians are out in the Pacific a little bit later on with Bering, hence Bering Strait, but they're really focusing on land conquest in Siberia for both resources and population movements. And the English are in the Americas and also in India with Henry Hudson, and much, much, much later, this guy Cook. Cook we will focus on in period 5, because during this time period there is not a lot of disturbance in the Pacific. The peoples of the Pacific, other than Magellan, are not experiencing a lot of European interaction. So where these guys go? Here is Vasco da Gama's route. There is the Cape of Good Hope. Here is Magellan's route. There's where he dies in the Philippines in 1521. And here are Cook's explorations. You can see he was going all around, all around. When I was in Hawaii, I saw some Cook references. So we will talk about Cook when we get to period 5. Okay, so why were these Europeans out there? Well, of course, they want to dominate trade. So these how are they going to do that? They're going to use these monopoly countries, or companies, excuse me, that look to either facilitate trade or to dominate trade in some other respect. Um, European merchants' role in Asian trade was not to dominate it. It was characterized mostly by transporting goods from one Asian country to another market in Asia or back to Europe. So really these guys, they are porters, okay, in Asia. Um, they also build trading post empires. The Portuguese developed the school of navigation, and then, because they're the first out the gates, they create the first global trading post empire, which later on evolves into being joint stock companies. These trading posts were basically places like the Portuguese would control an island, and they would, they would patrol that island with ships. It's my funky looking island. And whenever a new ship would come into their territory, they'd say, "You need to pay us money to pass through." And that new ship would be like, "What? We never had to do that before." But they would. They would pay. If they didn't, they would take their ships and or destroy their ships. This was violent. Obviously, and that's you can see that with Alfonso de Albuquerque, the example used in your book. But it was always violent from the European standpoint. For example, Vasco da Gama, I spelled that wrong there. He actually ran into a group of um, Muslims who were on their trip to the Hajj, like they were on a ship going to Mecca, and he killed them all because he wanted to, and he was Christian, so and they were Muslims, so that's what he was going to do. So Europeans always looked at this, not all of them, but often looked at this very violently. Eventually, the Portuguese lose their edge, and this results in the English and the French taking over. The English and the French simply have more population than and resources because of that population than the Portuguese did. So they had more financial and human resources. So in the next portion of the flipped classroom, we're going to get into the joint stock companies and where some of these European countries controlled, like what were some of the biggest changes for them, and more areas of competition.